Today we are here for an interesting session around identity security. Before we get started, I'd like to do a couple of quick checks. I understand there's been a 1-minute delay. We want to ensure that you are able to see our screen clearly and able to hear our voice as well. So if you're able to see my screen that says identity security, all right, just drop me a message and Tracy is going to check and let me know. We'll get started in a minute. A quick audio video check.
If anybody's having any problems, please let us know.
Lovely. I think we are good to go. The audio and video seems to be working fine. Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. All right. I hope you guys have grabbed a cup of coffee and have a notepad because we have an interesting session ahead of us. It's going to be for an hour, and I promise we're going to be doing action items and action items only. So this is one juncture in the identity landscape where identities have become important than ever before. A while back, if you were to travel back in time, about a decade ago, things were very different when it came to identity. Essentially, most of the stuff that happened around identity were on-premise, and administrators loved how identities and the whole architecture around identities work. But today, users have started experiencing and expecting a consumeristic approach towards identities. They want identities on the go. And that turns out to be a very big challenge for administrators, not from an infrastructure standpoint, but from a security standpoint. So through today's session, we are going to try and understand as to how has identity as an entity evolved over time, and what challenges does it pose to administrators and organizations through their IT security journey. For a long time, for a very, very long time, identity has been on the background, not essentially at the center of security. Historically, that's how it's been. Most focus for administrators has essentially been around the perimeter or the devices on the perimeter. That's how they've kept the organization secure. And when it came to identities, they were safeguarded within the perimeter. They were insulated from the outside world. At best, identities operated within an intranet. But now things are very different. You cannot expect your employees to do the same thing as they used to do a couple of years ago. In fact, you see a tremendous increase in the number of employees who are on the go, who are road warriors. You see people working from home, and that specific culture has taken a huge leap right now. There are design teams. It's not just the sales team that works from home. Works on the go. You have designers, you have marketeers, you have different verticals of an organization trying to work from home. And that, again, brings a very big deviation as to how identities were managed. Not just that, talk about devices. Talk about people bringing their own devices. So you essentially have to start looking for options. You essentially have to start acknowledging the factor that identities are diverse and they are spread out all over the place. So rather than treating identities as something within your perimeter, start considering identities as something that's right on your perimeter. It's again very important to do this one change in mindset, because that's going to help how you handle identities. You must be hearing a lot of things around zero trust security, privileged access management taking a turn. Things like that essentially are structured around this very idea that identity has become a perimeter for organizations. So we would want to go further and explore how exactly has this specific aspect of identity been a problem, and this being a problem because of the legacy systems and practices that we follow. Because while back, if you consider identities, it was all about trust. It started with trusting an IP address, letting them access specific resources in your organization. It can't be as simple as that anymore. Like I just pointed out, there's this concept of bringing their own device. How do you ensure that works out with your existing best practices or with your existing policies? How are you going to go on and take control over machine identities? A single user is probably going to have 10 or 15 different accesses, and trust me, not all of them are on-prem. Maybe more than 60 or 70% of them are on the cloud. So the idea or the agenda is to very much understand and acknowledge the shifting trend in how identities are architectured inside organizations and how organizations and enterprises have had a tough time coping up with this change just because security has become hand in hand with identities, and not many organizations are up to pace. And we'll go forward talking about how can you make your identity access management foolproof. We are going to talk about a couple of best practices right here. Essentially, I'm going to teach you a couple of cool tricks and hacks that can change the way how your organization and stakeholders see identity. So the whole idea of identities has been on the background for a long time. It's time it takes center stage. I'm pretty sure a lot of you folks joining today are IAM leaders, and you would have great number of reasons by the end of this presentation to convince your board to do an overhaul for your identity access management strategy. When you look at things as how they are, it seems quite straightforward. It seems like an absolutely happy organization. Everybody seems to be having a good time. But at the end of the day, things aren't the way they seem to. As we speak, all right, there could be an attacker lurking out there in your organization. As long as all that an attacker is bothered about is the behavior of your users. The attacker takes time. In fact, I would go on to say that they know your users better than you do. They take their time, they analyze their behavior, they look for patterns, they look for that one weak spot to get into your organization. Because I'd like to always quote this: the security of your organization is only as strong as the weakest link in your organization. And for an attacker, the obvious weakest link is users and people. And now that identities are multifold than before, they're looking for those touch points that are vulnerable, and all they need is just one entry point. And in fact, Microsoft agreed, and they were very forthcoming with this infographic piece. It's a little disturbing, but that's how things are. If we're talking about Active Directory security right here, all that an attacker needs is 2 days of time from the moment they have gotten their first access point. We're talking about attackers being able to get into your system and take just 2 days to crack into an admin account. So that is definitely scary. It doesn't really stop right there. Getting into the account is just the first part of the problem. The next bit of it is not having practices or policies or solutions to notify administrators or organizations that something's going wrong. Because the attackers are super trained. They know how to exfiltrate data without tipping the radar. So most of these attacks that we're talking about, data breaches that had happened in the past, sadly were discovered only after a couple of months after the attack had taken place. So there's one recommendation. My first recommendation for the day for you is going to be start considering the possibility of an attacker lurking in your system already as we speak. Start considering that possibility. So if you change that one mindset, I'm pretty sure the way you approach identity security is going to change. Why do I say that? Why do I want you to consider that there's an attacker already in your system? Because it's almost impossible these days to go on and claim that you're 100% secure. Probably the only way to call yourself 100% secure is when you shut down all your systems, bury a 6 feet deep hole, and bury all your machines. That's the only way you can say secure. The moment you turn on your identities are live, there are chances that something could go wrong. And one infographic that kind of validates my statement that I just made is this right here. We are very well aware of the fact that phishing attacks, they've been there for a very long time. Anybody who uses a computer or a mobile device must at some point in time have heard and realized and been told that do not open emails that are malicious looking. We still have users who are in the part of the equation of identities that cause most of the time the trouble that we face when it comes to identity security. What do your users do the moment they see an email that says, do not open? The first thing that they do is open the email. What do your users do when there's an attachment that says, do not download? They download the attachment. So account takeovers are taking place as we speak. And in fact, now that the identities that we're talking about are online, it's become all the more easy for attackers and hackers to get out there and get hold of these identities. A while back, security for identities wasn't a big deal. Now, the whole idea of users having multiple identities and them having to remember passwords for multiple identities turns out to be a challenge. We'll be talking about that in a while. So account takeovers are happening as we speak, and all that the attacker wants to is get hold of your credential. They're going to do it through a social engineering attack. It could be a simple phishing email where they social scam you. They establish control. They do an internal recon. They wait for the right time. They exfiltrate all the data that they have, and then even before you know, they're out of your system. That's basically because attackers are well trained, they're groomed, they speak the business lingo. They are almost perfect when it comes to getting and executing the attack. They go completely undetected under the radar, no matter what systems you have. So we are talking about not being able to tackle attackers with existing native tools that we've got. Active Directory is about 20 years old, 2 decades old. Does it stop your users from having a password such as password at 123? The simple answer is no. That's just one example. With existing, within on-prem systems, with the native options that you've got, preventing your system from attackers is not really an option that you've got. So this goes with the infographic again that's right here. We ran a survey and we found out that a lot of administrators, a lot of CISOs, CTOs for that matter, agree to the fact that they are under some sort of the attack or the other. You turn on the news, you see one cybersecurity attack per day. Big conglomerates, multi-million-dollar companies undergoing attacks that were basically because someone was a little forgetful. As simple as that. So the element of human error right here plays a big deal. So we are talking about not just securing your systems, not just educating your users, but foolproofing your systems. That has to be your priority when it comes to identity security. So how do you foolproof? I've got a couple of cases right here for you to go through and understand how serious is what we are talking about. We've got GDPR. It made rounds last year. When you want to do business with a company in the EU, PII protection has to be your priority. GDPR demanded that. Now, I'm pretty sure a lot of you who are joining me today are probably, we've got a good set of people joining me from California. There's California Consumer Privacy Act that's going out live starting next year, Jan 1. Every law, every privacy law that we're talking about is around data privacy, is around personally identifiable information, is around credentials being safe, credentials being stolen, and how exactly are organizations going to equip them. So if you see disturbing numbers, I don't want to go through everything. I've left it for you to go through. So one point that I want to highlight right here is the image of an organization, the reputation that's associated with the organization, let alone the fine, let alone the massive fine that you pay or the ransom that you pay. You see organizations losing business. You see organizations losing trust. 7% to 5.9% dip in the number of customers who were there for a specific industry after a major attack. So this is not just for organizations in multiple industries. We're talking about Deloitte, a cybersecurity consultancy. They've been number one in cybersecurity consultancy for a very long time. They do a lot of other consulting, but when it comes to cybersecurity, they're real good in consulting. They had a massive cybersecurity breach a couple of years ago. And why did this happen? Not because they did not have a SIM solution or a best-in-class security solution. Nothing at all. They had the best multi-layered security system that someone could have. They, in fact, gave a lot of organizations best practices to get things done. The whole idea of not enabling just one step, which was a two-factor authentication. They did not do that, and that was the end of Deloitte's reputation. They had a massive risk. They lost a lot of employee data, customer data, passwords, IP addresses, architectural diagram, intellectual property, so on and so forth, just because they lost one credential, and that credential or that account was not protected by a second factor of authentication. So that is another recommendation that I want to make. Be it an on-prem system, be it a cloud system that you're working on, look for solutions that help you with a two-factor authentication at least. 90% of identity problems are not your concern anymore if you have a second factor of authentication right there. So a couple of you might be wondering about on-premise implementation of TFA. I'm going to get there in a while. If you're on your Azure, it comes for free. Please implement multi-factor authentication. It's just one button away. It takes less than 10 minutes to configure MFA. You can do it granularly. Please do that. That's my second recommendation for you today. So as we go through the whole idea of identity security, I am pretty sure you must have been bombarded with a lot of models. They call it the zero trust model. You would not want to trust anybody. That's the fundamental of zero trust model. Do not give access to anybody unless it's absolutely required. Even if you give access to someone, make it just in time. Make sure you remove the accesses right after the job is done. Use the least privileged approach. These are certain recommendations that the zero trust model has. But is zero trust enough? That's the whole question right here. Is zero trust enough? So you try to restrict the number of accesses, all right. But still, is it safe enough to just go with the zero trust model? As a matter of fact, the answer is yes and no. I would rather look for something that is more adaptive. Rather than having robust models out there, it makes sense to start your identity security journey with an adaptive model. Continuous assessment of risk and threat is something that you need to do. How do you do it is quite straightforward and simple. I've laid it out as a diagram right here, so you're able to see that the whole idea of compliance and identity security go hand in hand. It starts with you ensuring that you have contextual authentication policies. Can you restrict access based on context? That's a big question that you'll have to ask yourself as you're taking your identity security journey. Can you monitor critical usage? Does your existing identity system have provision for looking into transactions that happen day in, day out with respect to identities, notifying you if something has gone wrong? And if you had an insight, can you immediately act on it? Can you investigate? Can you analyze? Can you handle a threat and adjust your posture? That's the whole idea of CARTA, the model that we recommend. This is a model that's recommended by Gartner. We follow suite as well. It seems to be the most logical approach towards identity security. You look for a solution that is continuous, that is adaptive, because when it comes to identities, they're never the same. You cannot do a spray and pray approach. You will need something that is very pointed. You will need to evaluate, look into every user account quite differently. So look for solutions that are adaptive. Look for solutions that evaluate access based on context. Look for solutions that can monitor and notify you when there are deviations, that can also help you manage and also help you drive results. So that's the kind of model that you should be looking for in this identity security. So we've been talking about a couple of best practices here. I started out with one recommendation, which was the idea of considering that a hacker is already in your system. The next recommendation that I had asked you to do was turning on multi-factor authentication, which is a simple thing to do. The next one is, if you're on your journey towards identity security, look for a model that is adaptive, because identities are evolving at a rapid pace. The accesses are also supposed to be contextual. Have that in mind. So we spoke about a case a while back. We spoke about the Deloitte case. There's another interesting case that I want you to look into. When it comes to PII, or personally identifiable information, You would not believe me if I tell you that your user record gets sold for $5 on the dark web, and your health record, all right, gets sold for $50. There are organizations out there, marketeers out there who are ready to buy any data around your behavior and start advertising based on your behavior. So there have been instances where organizations lost user records, and they see immediate problems that follow. Things like people being advertised with the personal record that got sold. Here, there's another example that's right there where 145 million user record got stolen. We're talking about mailing address, we're talking about phone numbers, we're talking about date of birth. With these, a lot can be done. So how do you have a model that does not just let you know that something went wrong, but helps you act right away? All this happened basically because there was no provision to check for deviation in behavior. So a critical account was hacked, all right, and deviation in that account was absolutely not taken into consideration at all. The behavior wasn't analyzed, and the attacker remained in the system for almost 229 days. That's more than enough time to take over your entire data set. We're talking about lots of lost reads, lots of personally identifiable information being lost right here. So what we're looking at is a direction where identity access management and data security need to be going hand in hand. So here I'm going to be giving you a very basic model. How do you get your IAM and data security governance going hand in hand? So here it all starts with your ability to do a risk assessment. So if you have a specific set of identities, let's say accounts with the keys to your kingdom, let's say accounts with privileges, you will need provisions to analyze them. You will need to understand how big is your attack surface and start monitoring any data transaction that goes on through these privileged accounts. So managing these is, again, a challenge, but getting that architecture right is all about getting your identity access management and data security governance working hand in hand. So I've got a model right here. It might look a little complex, but if you note it closely, it isn't that complex. It starts by understanding your organization's architecture and your organization's central goal. So where is all the critical data that we're talking about? How are you going to get your data sets prioritized? Where are your data stored? How are you going to have an analytics model work hand in hand with that? If we are talking about identity management, it has to go hand in hand with a CAST system, with a user entity behavior analytics system. It all works hand in hand for you to be able to say you are 100% secure when it comes to data security. So how do you do that? Because when it comes to data security, the first touch point obviously is a lost credential. It's important that privileged accounts are monitored. If there are data accesses at unholy hours, at probably from a different geographical location, you will need to be notified. So user behavior comes into place. If you want to know where are these accesses coming from, you need a CAST system. So no longer identities are done in silos. They form a central part of your security strategy. And the diagram right here is as to how you manage your identity and data governance hand in hand. So have clear-cut security policies that have identities at the center. Have orchestrations or automations that get the job done, which is exactly what I'm going to be giving you in a while. I'm going to be giving you best practices. We've discussed about quite some ground now. We've covered quite some ground now. Now I'm going to give you best practices that could get your identity strategy sorted. So we are talking about 6 best practices right here, the ones that could probably get 90% of your identity security problems cleared off. The first one is going to be around automation. So robotic process automation, we've been using it for a long time. Administrators are fascinated by it. I myself am a big fan of robotic process automation. Here, when we're talking about identities, it makes a lot of sense to automate your onboarding and offboarding. When it comes to user lifecycle, that's one place where a lot of problem occurs. A while back, we were talking about data security. Most of the time, major data security leaks are due to privilege escalations. Someone who's not supposed to be having access to a file or a folder ends up having access because it was manually given and it was not revoked right on time. So administrators are burdened with enormous load of identity churn that happens day in, day out. It's not as simple as one click users get provision, right click delete, the users get deprovision. It's never like that. The whole process around identity and entitlement management is quite complicated. So you should start looking for systems that let you streamline the whole onboarding and offboarding process and managing as well. So as we go through the life cycle, it's important to understand that it's not just provisioning users in one platform, but provisioning them across multiple platforms with the right entitlements, with the right mappings, with the right access to the resources. And when you do it manually, there are chances that you might end up doing a mistake. And when there's an automation that could do, and that too an automation that can effortlessly talk to, let's say, a HR system or a service desk system where a request comes in from the HR, it accesses the portal, it provisions the user, notifies the administrator of what had happened, has entitlements marked rightly because there's context associated with it. There's access that's provided based on roles, based on attributes. You get that right, major problem is solved. So entitlement management done right through automation is a critical aspect of identity security. You try to foolproof the first step or the first entry right here. So they get the right access. And the next point right here is as they move through their life cycle, users are going to get more access. Old ones are supposed to be removed. A classic example is someone moving from the sales department to marketing. At times, someone in the marketing necessarily need not have access to the sales data. They're into marketing right now, but still, the old entitlements are not removed because it's a manual thing to do. And at times, administrators, again, you can't blame them. The sheer load, at times, once or twice, you miss that out. So look for solutions that are adaptive, that are policy-based, and work at an attribute level. It could be any target system, not just Active Directory. It could be Office 365. It could be G Suite. Any target system that we're talking about, look for solutions that understand context. If a user moves from department A to B, entitlements need to automatically change. New ones need to be given, old ones need to be revoked. It has to be as simple as an administrator looking into a notification and say, okay, great, things are going good. That's how you'll have to look for a system that does an RPA. And the last phase of the life cycle, the obvious and the most challenging one, which is deprovisioning users, that's always been a challenge because, like I told you, deprovisioning isn't just right-click and delete. It's a multi-stage process. You, as a matter of fact, most of the time find deprovisioning a lot more challenging than onboarding. A couple of reasons. Through the life cycle, a user gets more access, more touch points, more devices, more resources. So having a checklist of 100 things to deprovision right when a user is leaving is a difficult thing to do manually. So have systems in place that does that for you. And that doesn't just have to be with deprovisioning. We can also talk about stale users or inactive accounts, a major source of security problems. There are two things. One is deprovisioning employees who are leaving. That's again a problem. Then the next one is stale accounts. When it's about stale accounts, that's the first spot that an attacker looks for. That's the most easy entrance that an attacker has. Most of the time, the inactive accounts that we're talking about go absolutely unmonitored. There could be inactive accounts that still have accesses to critical resources in your organization. And attackers are so advanced that they follow organizations to see who's leaving the organization just so that they can get hold of one such inactive account and get in. And when we're talking about deprovisioning accounts, if you do not do a full-fledged cleanup, there are chances that your users leave a backdoor access. A lot of them do that. We've had a survey conducted and we've seen results that are mind-boggling. So many organizations found out after a quick tip that we had given that they've had accounts with accesses that had backdoor entrance. It could be something as simple as a mail forwarding set to a personal account. We do not want our users to do that. So there's a lot around identity security that needs to be taken into consideration. And when it's the last phase, essentially, user deprovisioning, you would need to have a checklist that very clearly marks what accesses they had, what ones need to be removed. And the best part is if that can be automated and if that can be done across target systems, it's the best way to do it. So we're talking about a multi-step sequential deprovisioning that effectively revokes not just permissions, also licenses, also any potential backdoor accesses, forwardings that are set, and purges all these inactive accounts. So you should just be receiving reports saying there were these many inactive accounts, they got purged. There were these many accesses, they got removed. That's the kind of system that you should be building for your identity infrastructure. So we've spoken about the first tip of the 6 tips, which is to get RPA or robotic process automation done and set for your user lifecycle management. Manual error is the big challenge that we are solving right here. Besides that, when it comes to business benefit, you're going to be saving tremendous loads of time. Lots of, you can probably be using it for something that's a lot more productive. So we're talking about users right here now. We just saw how automation can help you. We're just talking about users right now. So when it comes to users, no matter what policies you try and set, they somehow try to circumvent the policy. We were talking about users being a security vulnerability because we've seen instances where they write their passwords on a piece of paper and have it stuck on top of the desktop. So how are we going to ensure that they have that they adhere to your policies? And when it comes to Active Directory, the inbuilt policies aren't very bright. When it comes to the policies, there's no provision to get them not to set a password like password at 123 or an incremental password. And the granularity has always been a challenge. So we're talking about users being a problem, number one, and existing native systems not being able to defend against the most basic attacks. It could be a dictionary attack. It could be a password spray attack. It could be a credential stuffing. How exactly can you say, or who among you can say that existing native systems can help you defend that? It all boils down to one basic question. It boils down to this question where it's always about usability versus security. So your users most of the time resist a change because they find it hard to implement and hard to adhere to. And that's the reason why most of the emails from the IT get not read at all. So we would want to make it simple for them. We would want to make it foolproof as well. And I would suggest you don't give them too much control. You get the job done and let them not even notice. So we're talking about existing target systems not having password policies that are strong enough. And how do you look for a solution that can sit on top of those systems and enforce a stronger password policy? So I've got a couple of recommendations for you. Look for a system that stops users from setting passwords that are words straight out of the dictionary. So for a change, administrators and IT can have some fun. A dictionary attack that an attacker does, you could very much use the same dictionary, have it incorporated with your solution, let your users not set passwords from the dictionary. That's something that you could very easily do. And another problem around passwords is it's very predictable. You don't even need to have a complex bot or a tool to crack passwords. Human behavior is predictable. So patterns are something that you need to be worried about. Password at 123, organization at 123, first name at 123. QWERTY, keyboard waltzing as they say. Lots of people do that. So how do you train your system to stop your users from using patterns? That's something that you'll need to look into. And yes, Active Directory does have a password history functionality. Lots of tools do, but does it get to the granularity where you say none of the letters from my previous password can be used in my new password or something like that? Maybe 3 consecutive letters, you'd stop them from using that. So that ensures that there is no incremental passwords that are being set. I myself, though I talk about security, though I advise, at times password fatigue sets in. It happens. The first password that I set was maybe password at 123. The next one I set was password at 1234. So you stop your users from doing such silly mistakes. And how do you do that? You enforce a policy that's strong enough, and also at the same time make it accessible for the user. So restrict them from using repeated passwords, ensure that there's the right mix, prevent them from using patterns. And how do you do that? Make it usable. Most important challenge right here is to not to set a strong password policy, but to make it usable and right forward available for the user. So let's say they're resetting their password. That has to be available right at the place where they're doing it. Most of the time this is trouble. The friction is essentially because they don't get it. You give them what they're supposed to do, a simple checkbox is going to get the job done. So try to foolproof your system. There are a couple of more recommendations, like a timeout, like a captcha, like a notification that arrives when passwords are about to expire. Things like that could make your Active Directory security or identity security a little better. So we've spoken about a couple of recommendations right here, one around automation, one around password security. I would also want to retouch on the multi-factor part right here. I just spoke about MFA being an important aspect of identity security. A couple of options that you've got are verification codes, security question and answers. They're age-old, but they work to an extent. We're talking about moving forward with factors like biometrics. We're talking about Touch ID. We're talking about Face ID. How do you get them incorporated? How do you make it effortless? Touch ID, Face ID, your users are not even going to realize that they had to do one step extra. They do it all the time. With their Google, with their Facebook, they do such authentication. So it's already out there. They're already trained for it. And when it comes to security and MFA for privileged accounts, this is going to be my recommendation. A while back, as I started my presentation, I was talking about privileged accounts having a second factor right when they log in. So this is exactly how it looked like. So an administrator, all right, account is compromised, the credentials are out there. I would say I don't really care. The credential is compromised and I don't really care. How is that even possible? Because I have a second factor that's absolutely personalized. It could be an email verification or a Touch ID or a Face ID that I could choose, and I'd be granted access into my system or my server right after I do my second step verification. So here, it happens right at log on. It can be for your Linux, it can be for your Windows, it can be for your Mac. Look for solutions that do two-factor authentication right at the log on. Most of your problems are solved if you get this right. MFA for your applications, TFA right when you log on. That's something that you should definitely consider. So we've spoken about a couple of best practices. We've seen the automation side of things. We've seen the people side of things and how do you empower users with a great usability so that security is seamless. There's one more recommendation that I've got for you, which is getting everything audited. When I say everything, every action that an identity performs in your system, not just privileged users, talk about normal users, the whole deal of auditing reports that can come handy when you're doing a forensic analysis. You can start off with log-on auditing. You would want to know changes that are made by a user. You would want to have auditing for the files and folders that are accessed by the user. This forms a vital piece in your compliance strategy as well. So this is quite important, having an identity solution that does full-blown auditing. Look for such a solution. Just if I were to give you an example, the most basic one, if you had a great log-on auditing tool, a proactive one, you'd be able to stop a brute force attack. A brute force attack is essentially multiple logon failures because of wrong credentials followed by one successful credential and one successful logon. So there's a deviation, there's a set pattern right here. You would know that something's wrong with the logon and you'd be notified and you'd be able to step it. So there are a couple of examples right there that you could very much curtail if only you enable logon auditing. This is just one case, and how many use cases that you can solve with that. Island hopping, a classic case. finding getting that one touch point and going forward with that. That's what hackers do. They try to get hold of the domain admin credentials. They keep moving laterally. But when you notice, after the first logon, if you had a logon auditing solution that can check for that deviation and multiple logons happening consecutively and multiple touch points on multiple endpoints, you would know that something's wrong before they could get hold of your entire system. So have a strong auditing solution in place that does user auditing, that does object auditing. It can tell you a lot of insights. It can give you a lot of insights. It need not be reactive. It can be proactive and tell you what is going on. So we've spoken about a couple of action items. The last one for the day is going to be the most important one, which is monitoring privileged accounts. We just saw how important it is to audit every account in your organization. Controlling and monitoring privileged accounts is the most important of them all. And when you do privileged accounts, there are certain best practices that you can have in mind. Quite simple, not difficult at all. The first one is going to be the just-in-time access. Give them access only when it's absolutely required. Give them access right on time. So set up your privileged entitlement delegation management, or they call it PEDM, in such a way that it has least privilege ingrained, only when required, only for the user who requires it, and there has to be an automation that is associated that revokes all those accesses after the use. So this is a little difficult to set up in the beginning, but once you've got it set up, it should be operating real smooth and should be helping you manage your privileged accounts straightforward. So we're talking about just-in-time access to your privileged accounts, and that's helping you for your identity security. There's something else that you'll need to understand through your journey of privilege and delegation management, trying to do it granularly. So if you were to ever try doing delegation or entitlement management through the stock options, you would have noticed it's not really friendly when it comes to saying these many privileges, these attributes need to be given. At times, you end up giving more than what's required just because of a native limitation. We don't want you to do that. Get granular, get attribute level, give the stakeholders only what they truly require. And when it comes to identity management, I'm very sure there are a lot of stakeholders who have nothing to do with it but still requesting you for access for something or the other. So get granular, give them only what's required. On top of all this, if still something goes wrong, you can always rely on analytics. You can always rely on UEBA or UBA to check what had gone wrong. So we're talking about systems that can notify you based on risk scores. Every user in the organization, every given second gets analyzed, their behaviors get tracked. If there are any deviations, it could be geography. Let's say I'm presenting from California right now. All right. In another 30 minutes, I have an access that happens from, let's say, Ukraine. That's a deviation. Unless, if only if I had the power to teleport, I would not have been able to do it. So we are talking about such deviations that are quite obvious. It could be factors like geography. It could be factors like network location. It could be your IP. It could be the device from which they're logging in. It could be anything around these 15 factors that I'm talking about that gets taken into consideration to draw a risk score for every user individually. And when there's a deviation, you get notified. Is that enough? What if you could act on that deviation? And that's exactly where adaptive authentication, a very important component when you're evaluating an identity solution, comes into the picture. Your system needs to have the capability to look into such deviations and immediately make it difficult for the attacker or the hacker who's trying to get into the system. Extra layers of security, extra factors of authentication have to step in to stop the attacker from going any further. So if the risk score seemed to be normal, if no deviations were there, the access is going to be effortless or frictionless, as we like to call it. Just one security question or one factor of authentication like a Face ID. If there seems to be a deviation, the administrators get notified, the concerned user gets a prompt, and the attacker can literally not pass through because there are extra factors that the attacker needs to go through. So adaptive authentication is something that you need to have in mind. So when you're doing or taking this identity security journey, look for a solution that does all this. You'd want to do auditing, you'd want to do automation, you'd want to do multi-factor, you'd want to do adaptive authentication, and a lot more that I discussed today, 6 best practices that I gave you around identity security, and look for a solution that does all of this under one panel. So what we've done is we've put together a couple of resources around identity security. We'd love to share it. Just all you got to do is drop me an email or Tracy an email, and we'd love to share it. So it's all about making the right choice. We understand that identity security is not a child's play. A lot goes behind identity security, and it's more important than ever before. It's become critical and central to security. Thank you so much, guys. You've been lovely. If you have questions, I'm around to take your questions. Over to you, Tracy.
Okay, great. What a wonderful presentation. So much valuable information. I do have some questions, and audience, please feel free to submit your question too, and we'll get to as many as we can. So our first question is, I have a hybrid environment. Can I manage it using AD360?
All right, so absolutely the answer is yes. And the way how we see it, the future is hybrid. Though a lot of people are trying to move to cloud only, we still see a majority of people still relying on hybrid. When it comes to hybrid, there are a couple of challenges. Provisioning users, both places, doing it in one go, that's something that you'd want to do with an automation. Yes, as a matter of fact, the simple answer is yes. AD360 helps you do that. And when you're looking for any solutions for that matter, I'd advise you to look for solutions that can do all of that through an automation or an RPA in one go. You wouldn't really want to do multiple identities multiple times, so you didn't want to do that. So look for a solution that does in one go. Yes, it's possible.
Very good. How about what kind of anomalies can we detect using user behavior analytics?
All right, so if I were to give you examples, one anomaly that I would want to start with is logon activity. If there's any unusual logon failures, that is something that you can look into. The example that I earlier pointed out, like a brute force attack, 10 repetitive logon failures followed by 1 successful logon. So your user behavior analytics can look into it. Or if you want to talk about, let's say, file activity, big chunk of file or folders being copied or moved. So data security comes into the picture. You'd be able to be notified if there's someone accessing out there a large volume of file that they've never ever accessed before. First time accesses to file in folders. Most of the attacks that we see these days are some way or the other detected by a UBA system. So an attacker tries to probably snoop into the system thinking that they get away if they're doing it maybe in the middle of the night. This is insiders, all right? People who are inside your organization, people who have a malicious intent but not very technically trained but have some level of privilege trying to access, your UBA system can notify that. Because mostly we see that there's a crazy volume of insiders trying to initiate some sort of attack, and most of them have an intent but not the required training. Your UBA can spot such a deviation in no time.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question in the queue. So if anybody else wants to put one in real quick, that would be great, and we'll get to it. How about what type of MFA authentication methods does AD360 support?
All right. So when it comes to multi-factor authentication, out of the box, there's support for Google Authenticator, Duo, RSA, Radius. We've got support for Microsoft Authenticator, and even physical devices like YubiKey Authenticator, one-time password, time-based. A lot of ones. I've just given you the ones that I can recall. There's a lot more.
Okay, here's another question. I have touched on it. How does this solution compare to Microsoft's ATA Advanced Threat Analytics? It also detects suspicious activity right away using UBA. Can you please clarify this point?
Can you please repeat the question? Microsoft Threat Analytics, yes, I got that. And UBA, I got that. So what's the question again?
Okay. how does this solution compare to Microsoft's ATA? It also detects suspicious activity right away using UBA.
Absolutely. That's a great question. So when it comes to how AD360 is structured, we have a SIM solution right here in Manage Engine called Log360, a full-blown SIM solution that does beyond identity security. So when it comes to how UEBA works, it's not just identities that come into the picture. There are a lot of network devices also that come into the picture. So you would want a system that just not tracks and detects a deviation, but one that could give you a correlation or a context. So when you get the whole picture, you'd be able to connect dots better, and you'd be able to have a better result. So most of the time when it comes to user behavior analytics, the problem is false positives. You end up answering a flag that was not required in the first place. The models that are out there today are very robust and rigid. They aren't very time sensitive and they aren't very dynamic. So look for solutions that not just take into consideration users' behavior, but also do a proper correlation before they arrive at a contextual report or a result. So that's how we do it when compared to Microsoft's inbuilt threat analytics. I'd like to thank everybody who's joined. I understand it's almost about the time of the year when things are wrapping up. I wish everybody a very happy Christmas and a happy New Year and a great identity journey. So this is the kind of time when you make the decision. Take some time, sharp out the strategy. I hope you found the presentation helpful. I've given you a couple of key pointers. I wouldn't call it 100%, but yes, we've given you certain best practices. Go back. I have my email ID displayed right now. Please write to me. We'd love to talk to you to understand what challenges you're facing. And if there's anything specific that we can help you with, we'd be more than happy to do that. Thank you all for your time. That would be it, Tracy. I want to thank everybody. That would be it.